As this is a National Day of Reflection, we will be pausing at 12 noon and we'll observe a minute's silence. So are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we have an apology of absence from Councillor Loudon.
Okay, and are there any declarations of sorry, Paul, your hand was up.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. It was just John Gibson will be he's not able to attend today.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Any declarations of interest? Okay, it's good. The minutes of the previous meeting are there for noting. Thank you. Doesn't appear to be any problems with any of them. And we now move to item 4, which is the review of engineering services. Now, this is a very comprehensive report, very well prepared. There's a huge amount of work gone into this, and I'm quite expecting there'll be quite a lot of questions. So I've got Stuart Fraser and Scott Dolgano, I think, who will lead us through this. Scott, maybe you first.
It was going to be me first, if that's
all right. Okay.
Just very briefly, but just
sorry, Stuart. You know I don't like to call over the top of you.
So good morning, Convener. Good morning, members, and thank you for the opportunity to come along and speak with you this morning. Just very briefly before passing over to Scott, just to put this into a little bit of context, we started this work back in April 2019. And the work has gone forward with the service, or the various services involved at that stage. The engineering functions were split between 3 different teams across the then Community Services and Development Infrastructure Service. And we've worked with officers from the team to take forward the review which comes before you this morning. And I'll pass over to Scott to take you through the steps that we've taken.
Thanks, Stuart. And apologies, members, just having trouble just loading up the presentation just very briefly. There is nothing much to take you through, but we just thought it would be useful just to use these slides as a focus. So hopefully you can read that, members.
Yeah, we can.
Good. So as Stuart says, you know, it's good to be here to present the recommendations of the report. First of all, just briefly, the process that's been undertaken is set out in detail in paragraph 5.1 of the report that's before you. And it's worth highlighting that the staff input to this exercise has been really, really good, and it's made it, you know, an easier process because of the enthusiasm and the willing participation and commitment of staff involved. We've had people represented from all the relevant teams right from the start. So and their feedback was positive, constructive, insightful. Because we got them from the start and involved, we feel like they've almost been part of the team, really. So they've had an input on the scope of the review, the options, the early analysis of issues that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and any opportunities for efficiencies and making better linkages across all the different disciplines and skill sets that they have. As well as that, you know, they've also been highlighting things that they know aware of from other authorities. And they've also helped us make links to other people, organisations, other authorities to test options and to look into the viability of different options a little further. So it's because of that and because of their consideration of the emerging recommendations that we hope that there's some level of buy-in to the report that's before you today. And indeed, the main themes that were picked up and were fed back to the redesign board last year have kind of remained consistent from an early stage and right the way through to the final report that's before you today. So these are the priorities that staff themselves were flagging as being major opportunities for how the organisation could work more effectively and make better use of the skills that we have across the organisation to make it, stronger moving forward. So it's as a result of that input, as I say, that we've had really good buy-in from staff, and it's our hope that the recommendations, if taken forward, there would be some recognition and understanding amongst staff about the potential benefits of those recommendations and in terms of how they work as individuals and as teams. So I'll hand you over to Stuart, who'll take you through the recommendations in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And so, members, I'm just going to run through the 10 recommendations that we've identified and highlight where we see some of these themes emerging. Some of these recommendations pick up a number of the themes, sometimes it's just a single theme, and we've got a little bit more thoughts on some of these themes that we can develop. So looking at the first, I suppose the most important recommendation, that's in terms of that consolidated structure. And to an extent, we've been overtaken by events here. You know, we've seen the move towards that single service, that consolidated structure is taking shape, and that's a most welcome development. And you know, the staff talked about removing the wall. You know, they talked about this wall that was in place between those different aspects of the engineering function previously, and so the hope, the expectation would be that we move to remove that wall and allow that greater collaboration amongst those professionals. But a key element I also wanted to highlight in there is the one that was a recurring focus of the feedback we got from the staff was that local connection. That, you know, moving to this consolidated structure, we cannot lose that local connection. There needs to continue to be that local knowledge, local service delivery, local accountability, and that'll be a challenge for the service, but it's one that stays right up at the front there for Malcolm to take forward. Second theme, again, as a development, I suppose, of that single service, picking up the theme of communication integration, identifying a clear vision and strategy for this new service. Crucially, also to involve the staff. There's a huge enthusiasm, as Scott has spoken about, on the part of those staff. They want to be involved, they want to be engaged, they've got ideas. So it's critical that they're involved in that process of bringing forward that new strategy and that vision for the service. You know, there's knowledge, there's professionalism, there's enthusiasm, and we need to take advantage of it. And we also begin to touch on resources in that recommendation there. The third recommendation, the coordinating collaborative approach to managing staff, projects and assets. And we're developing this integration theme again in our recommendation. I think we'd acknowledge that, you know, talk about asset management and like, it's easy for us to identify that's something we should be looking to achieve. Achieving that in practice is going to be much more challenging. So if we've got people working previously across 3 different teams, we see significant potential to work across those sections and across those parts of the service. And if we achieve that and we make better use of the resources, then that has advantages which will extend beyond the service itself. Measures for forecasting, allocating resources. Resources was a recurring theme of the workshops and our engagement with staff. How do we achieve and ensure best return for our investment? You know, and you know, there was a lot of discussion in the workshop and a lot of opinions expressed about how we do better with what we have. You know, and it's about reviewing our current mechanisms, identifying possible alternative mechanisms, identifying opportunities to obtain other sources of funding to complement and support the council's funding to support our management of these assets. The fifth recommendation, streamlining process and workload management. I suppose that's a recognition that the scope went beyond simply those professionals involved in delivering the engineering function at the front line, at the coalface, as it were, but also that we need to look at some of the back office functions and the service delivery that's in place there, and if there are improvements that can be undertaken. And we certainly heard, for example, from one area service manager who spoke powerfully on how much of his time is devoted to admin tasks, dealing with queries and complaints. And if we could do something to help him to free up his time so that he could focus on what other work which he saw would be of a higher priority and a better use of his time and resource. So that was something that we think the new consolidated service can look at to try to identify some improvements there. 6 and 7, we move on to the cost multiplier. Again, this was another recurring theme of the workshops we had with staff. Lot of discussion around the multiplier. So we have 2 recommendations here in respect of the multiplier. We don't identify a solution. We recognise that the use of the multiplier has consequences which extend beyond this particular service. And we can't simply wish it away or do away with it. Obviously, there's significant financial consequences of doing so. But it was clear there was a source of frustration on the part of both the service, or the part of the service that uses or relies upon the multiplier, and on the other part of the service who might otherwise use the professional staff within the PDU, for example. So it's something that I think all parts of the service would welcome the opportunity to do some further work upon. So as I've said at the most basic level, it's a can we identify a way to establish this if there's a way of making far greater use and knowledge of the skills that sit within the PDU and make greater use of those within the council, more effective use. And I think the one caveat to that is that we also recognise that in addition to making good use, there has to be a need to be clear that we're using that, and that's efficiently as well. And that simply involving the PDU itself that does not, it's maybe not the panacea. We have to make sure that efficiency to ensure we get best value. Number 8, again, tying in, I suppose, again, looking at the resource that we have within the PD and those other professionals within the service, and look at extending our current client base. Are there opportunities there? Is this maybe something to look to in the future rather than immediately? Number 9, the workforce plan. Currently, we have movement across and between the teams, and sometimes for progression. But I think the expression that was used on occasion was that these teams are fishing in the same pool. And what we have suggested we look to identify is the opportunity to take a more holistic approach to career progression and development within that wider service, now that we're bringing those 3 parts of the service together. So in a sense, to eliminate the competition and to replace it with, I suppose, a more sharing approach across the whole service. We saw the rainbow of opportunity or progression that sits within the care and learning service. That's something that was very powerful and something that was attracted, or some we were attracted by, and that opportunity to grow our own and support staff to develop and progress through the service. And make clear it's not a threat to anyone. That if we can share that experience and knowledge across the service. And finally, number 10, develop and build relationships with external parties. We spoke with external professionals, one of whom in particular identified the Northern Collaboration of Roads Authority as a real example of good practice going forward, and obviously Highland play a significant role in that collaboration. But other opportunities exist. We talked about trunk road management, other opportunities there, sharing facilities, for example, with the Trunk Road Maintenance Authority, looking at the examples of what other authorities might do in terms of the trunk road, and also other bodies such as Hightrans. So that's a very quick gallop through the recommendations, and obviously the report is there, and Scott and I are happy to answer any questions. And I'm not sure if Malcolm wants to come in at this point to add some thoughts.
I'll take some questions first, Stuart. I think one of the things that sticks out like a sore thumb is the potential negative impact of the cost multiplier. If it's making it internally not cost effective to use our own service, then maybe we need to look at changing it. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chair, and I totally agree with your statement there. I think what this has proven is obviously the value of the staff engagement, And I think that is the way forward for lots of stuff, because you know, it is so useful. One of the things that was mentioned was the management of workload and the lines of communication. I think it's important that the staff know what, you know, their processes and lines, but I think we also need to be very cognizant of the managers too, because some of the managers have got huge remits. And I think Stuart quoted a comment from somebody saying that they needed, they were processing admin type things. Well, that is not best value for the service, and it's not best value for going forward. What we need is our skill sets in these teams and these managers to be actually doing the actual role that they should be doing in whatever aspect of the engineering or whatever that they're doing. So I think that's really important, and I think that is a quick fix to do that, and we need to do that. The other thing as well on that note, we talk about getting apprentices in. Well, we need to make sure we've got the personnel there to support our apprentices. There's no point of having apprentices and not having that continuity of support, mentoring and education. And I think we need to be, the skilled personnel need to be available for that as well. And final point, sorry, Chair, is that some of the engineering things, I think you're absolutely right. We need to look at how other people are doing it. And the example I will cite just now is we're all very aware, COVID-wise, of heating, ventilation, that and mechanical services. That's a really skilled area of engineering, and there's not a lot of them out there with the expertise, and we're going to need that more in our council. If you think of our council estate for schools and post-COVID, so we really need to be thinking fleet of foot on that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small point, but you're talking of the transparency of departments working together. I would like to see some more feedback, so that if we've implemented a job with a department, we actually get feedback. The feedback's never been terribly good. And I'd like to see something built into it that we can even go and see a board to see how things are progressing. But I'd like to get more feedback in order to satisfy constituents. Thank you.
Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Bill. Right, okay, I read this over, and three things really came to my mind. First of all, every time staff feedback is mentioned, they're absolutely on the money. They know what needs to be done here. They're not absolutely sure how to, but there's a willingness which is of a very high level, and we need to use that. Also, their continued insight into what needs to change. I think they've been very frank, facing up to the fact that so much needs to change. This is a huge job. COVID's held it back for a year, and we really need to embrace this now. And the issue for me is how do we eat the elephant? How do we bake this into bite-sized chunks? I can recognise some of those chunks. There is the finance things. Recharging as a means of running this council has gone on for years. It was done for budgetary purposes, and to unpick it is going to take some doing. But we really need to get on with this, and this is the service which is impacted the most, and education, of course, as well, with all the buildings. So we've just got to get on with it. We need to unpick it. It doesn't make sense. So we need to. Well, it doesn't make logical sense. Might have made financial sense, but we really do need to unpick that, and we need to do that in collaboration with finance. Absolutely. I think that's one of the first jobs that starts, because that's going to be a big job. The other thing is facing up to the budgetary situation in roads. I think we've all started to do that. It's just about how we do it. That again, it's a big separate job. I mean, I've never been in favour of going for civil wars. I think they're the bloodiest of all. And I think what we need to be looking at is how we rebuild this service to the level it needs to be to cope. And what opportunities we get then will depend on how the budgets come in, whether we return to years of austerity or whether we can actually get on with managing the service. But I think this is a huge job. I think we need to be very, very mindful of what the staff does. There are some things we can begin to do straight away, like training together. There's a big HR element here, so that they begin to feel like one service. But actually how we deliver on this massive job, I think needs a lot more thought and consideration. Maybe my colleagues here have got better ideas than I have on that. Thank you.
Councillor Caddick.
Thanks, Convener. I do remember us discussing this right at the get-go as part of our process excellence projects and options. And as Councillor Davidson's just said, it's getting the staff involved on the process excellence has enabled us to get really good suggestions that from a management point of view, you don't always see the practicalities of how it works. So I think this approach to our review of how we work has been game changing for us, and I think we need to be sure that we carry on that way. I think the thing is, how do you implement the suggestions come up through the process excellence, and suggestions are made. It's enabling them to happen, I think, is the issue. I think there were organisational walls between housing and other public building, engineer, electrical support, plumbing and all that. And actually that didn't make sense at all geographically. And I think sadly there were still some district boundaries from the old district councils, which are 15 years ago, which we've never really dealt with. So some areas were dealt differently, completely differently. Some areas were contracted out, some weren't. And it's just taken so long to even get this far. But I think this is a big piece of work, and it's going to take a bit of time, but I'd like to see it pick up a pace so that we can actually do it, but it'll need some investment to do that. I think the different IT systems, which the two sets of the schools and the non-schools were using, was a problem. We were told that they captured different data, and they needed to well, that needs to be, we need a system that can capture both so that we can get what we need from the system. Certainly they need to be aligned so that all our engineers are working off the same software. And I think technology didn't allow us to do that properly. Remote working, Scottish Water, BT, they all work off software. They don't go back to their hub every day or even every week. Sometimes they work remotely, they have all their kit and they travel around, and it's all done remotely, which I think is actually very sensible. And COVID has actually proved that technology can work for us as a council. It's had some downsides because it's delayed stuff, but it's also meant that we've actually proved that we can do this, which we weren't doing in quite this way before. So we should be able to do it for the engineering side. And it would certainly allow us to use our resources better and more effectively, both internally, but also externally. So some of the specialist stuff we may wish to still contract out, but internally we should be a lot better off. I think the cost multiplier has already been raised as an issue. I think we need to review that. I'm not convinced about that. So and cross-charging has had its advantages because you could charge it to capital projects, but there's a cost to even cost-charging the whole process, and it just loses its flexibility. So I think there's a lot to unpick, but I think we're well on our way. I just want to make sure we keep the momentum up on this, because this is a huge piece of work, brilliant work done so far. Let's try and pick up the pace and get it finished so that we can move on. Thanks.
Councillor Bremner.
Thanks, Convener. There's so many things in this project that actually you can look at it right across the spectrum of stuff that we do in council. So I'm sure that a lot of the stuff that's come out of this review is probably not a surprise. But that doesn't get away from the fact that this paper is a really good paper. As we were recognising yesterday, those of us who were having our pre-meet about this meeting today, all the papers are good papers. It's the stuff that the Redesign Board does well. So hats off to the folks for bringing these papers to us today, because you can tell the work that's in there. It's only council that's going to make a mess of it in terms of the implementation of it. Now, that's one of the points. I see Councillor Davidson smiling there because I've said this before. I would love to see a kind of implementation plan that we detail as a redesign board, so that council, once it gets it, understands exactly how we envisage it being implemented, and we do get the effects, the benefits of the whole project to a maximum. So I'd like to see that coming forward in the future, not just for this one, but for all the plans that come through the redesign, so that we know that we get them implemented the way that they've come through the redesign process. We get them implemented to realise that benefit of that whole review, and we actually get a properly redesigned service implemented. So that's one of them. Second one is in terms of when we go through these processes and we see that there are contributions from managers and others who get that opportunity to be able to detail their frustrations, and they believe that in detailing that, you know what, we're going to do something about it, and they're going to have the confidence in us going to be able to do something about it. So if they say that they're lumbered with administration tasks, so that they don't actually get the task that is required of them done, or it's inhibited, how do we examine that within that person's actual detail in their job, so that we get the balance right? There is an element of administration that's required of their job, but to what extent is that impinging on their ability? How are we measuring that with those people that have actually fed into that process there just now? Maybe, Scott, you could let us know on that. And the last one is the cost multiplier. I mentioned this yesterday. Item 6, if you'll forgive me just 2 seconds, I'm on the computer here, need to flip between the screens, which isn't a terrible task when you think on the amount of paper that it cuts down on. I'm sure the convener might want to mention that. Item 6, review costs recovered under the cost multiplier model. That's a good recommendation insofar as the engineering goes, but as Caroline Caddick said there just now, are we in a position where one of those recommendations actually takes it forward and says we need to review the actual model itself? Thanks.
Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to those that produced this paper. It's a really exciting opportunity. I've just got to apologise to my my teammates. Actually, I managed to miss the pre-meeting, so my thoughts are not completely coordinated, but I've got some exciting thoughts.
It's all right, well, you weren't invited anyway, so...
No, I know, that's okay. Right, so some things that occurred to me here. You know, this is a really complex situation that's described here. And I was wondering what would be the main theme that would pull all these things together. And I wonder if there's something that we need to pay a wee bit more attention to, which is maybe like the data structure and the process design. These things, these activities are engineering activities in themselves. We need to think about what data we need and how it's going to be used. And that takes us back to the idea of a requirements analysis. The idea of the project design unit I like. I don't think I fully understand the idea of the multiplier. I've heard that term used in different contexts. I don't think actually management necessarily increases the cost of things, if that's what's meant. It's something I want to discuss with you outside. Not managing is more costly than actually managing effectively. Now, having said these are engineering disciplines, so I think the glue that fits all this stuff together is information. What assets are we working on? What projects are we want to undertake? And that's big projects, but also the wee projects that we do every day. Wee tiny things that all add up to quite a lot in the long run. We need to get better records on these projects, I believe. And at the moment, it seems to me that we tend to work in fragments. We do, I can identify just in the transport area alone, 8 projects, fragments that are going on in my ward, and all interact with one another. But we don't actually acknowledge that in the way that we approach the work, not necessarily. We see the results of that in the fact that roads are shut very frequently, more than getting things done all in a oneer. We tend to get them done a wee bit at a time. Now, that affects our conversation with the constituents as well. I don't like going back to constituents and saying, no, you can't get this done. It's not going to be done. We don't have the money, or we haven't got the opportunity to get this done. I'd far prefer to go to them and say, it's not going to be done now, but that will be attended to at some future state in our strategy. So to try to pull this together to some sort of question, I'm going to say, what steps are we taking to engage the skills that will be required in data design, data analysis, and process design to make all these aspirations happen? Because that is a skill that we really need on this huge project. And the other question I've got is again about the multiplier. I don't really understand what is meant by that, but exciting project. If we get this right, we're going to deliver much more of what our constituents need, what they're asking us for, and we will get the costs under control. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. There's a lot to be said about integrating all of this around the idea of projects and data.
I think the main thing I've heard this morning is has come from Raymond, actually. We cannot let the council shred the work that's been done to get us to this paper. Nor do I want to see it sitting gathering dust on a departmental desk. You know, these proposals need to be implemented because they will make things better. Liz, I've noticed your hand up. Maybe you can clarify for Councillor Boyd, among others, what is meant by the multiplier.
So what's happening is when we're recharging costs out with the service, we're not just charging at cost, we're basically charging a profit. So we're charging more than the original cost, so whether it's 200% or in this case, I think 2.5 times or whatever, which therefore means that it's a very expensive service, or it appears to be. But actually, if we were only charging at cost, then it would not be. So we are actually, it's one of the actions for my service to look at all of the internal recharges across the council to see where we can eliminate those appropriately. But once we do that, we may come up with a budget pressure arising from that, depending upon how the recharges work. And I can go into more detail once we've done the piece of work, but it's still on our action plan and we're definitely going to do it. And then we'll decide what we're going to do about it once we actually have the information, but it's there as an action to be dealt with in the next couple of months. So it will continue at a pace, and that's right across the council.
Thanks, Liz. Malcolm.
Yeah, just in terms of, I think the review is excellent, and it's been, you know, a real help to the redesign of the new service. You know, first and foremost, it is about integration of historic teams that have been split across actually 3 different services or 3 different areas within the previous community services and D&I. So we're at the point now where absolutely the key messages set out in the recommendations will be brought forward. The integration of day-to-day activity, whether it's the small things that Councillor Boyd was talking about, or the large projects like the West Link, or projects like that, the same principles apply across both. We've got to make sure that the design capability and capacity within the service is totally shared, and that there aren't these internal walls. the back office things that need done, whether that's contract management, procurement, dealing with inquiries, dealing with freedom of information requests, dealing with applications for different things that we need to do in terms of road openings, road closures, you know, a whole range of different things. There is so much there that can be streamlined and improved. And I think back to where we started with planning and with building standards, where we had an entirely paper-based system. We now have it totally integrated. It means that people can work from anywhere. We can share workloads across areas if required, if there's flexibility. And we started this journey by moving the road construction consent process electronic, and we've made a lot of progress there. So actually, there's really good models we can use that deal with some of the data issues that again Councillor Boyd mentioned. But it's also about the practical things. It's about building maintenance costs, perhaps more into our capital projects than perhaps they have been in the past. The choices of material, etc., being really closely aligned to the people who are going to ultimately be responsible for maintenance. I think the idea, I think Councillor Carrick mentioned about or Margaret, sorry, apologies if I've got it the wrong way around, but we're talking about people coming in to the service. Councillor Coburn, apologies, I think it was you who mentioned that is absolutely where we are. So we're using the current Economic Prosperity Fund to, that was agreed in terms of looking at modern apprentice and youth trainee posts, because we do have an aging workforce and we have lots and lots of skills that we do not want to lose their benefit from the council. So it's really important we do that. So I think you'll see in the paper that comes to council on the wider restructure, this will be a really important part of my service restructure. And we're keen to do it not just on the management and organisation front, but also in terms of all of the back office. And I would be really pleased to when the transformation we need to do for all the processes and all the working arrangements are brought forward, that comes back to Redesign Board in terms of progress reports. I'd be more than happy to do that, because I think it is important that a lot of it's operational, but equally it is important that you give it the scrutiny and the support required, given that there may at some point be as Liz pointed out, some of the big challenges around internal recharging involve finance. So that was just a summary, convener, but it really is something you can be assured we are going to go full on with this over the next year. And I think the restructure paper that comes to whatever meeting it comes to will set out very clearly what we're seeking to achieve.
Scott, I'm sure I saw your hand up, but if it wasn't.
Well, Malcolm's covered on most of those points, actually, that I was going to come back to members on. But I mean, one thing just to add to what Malcolm said there is that one of the opportunities that was raised through the piece of work was the opportunities to improve the back office systems that Malcolm has referred to, and one of the benefit that might cut across a number of the issues that's been raised around how we consolidate and coordinate across the service. We're talking about coordinating and consolidating our teams and skills. We're talking about coordinating and consolidating the workload and helping members and communities understand the priorities, especially in that budget situation that's been outlined. And we're also helping the council in its communications. If we manage it, if we have a system that better allows people to understand the staff's own individual contribution to council priorities, that there's a feeling that staff will feel more positive about the job that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but also then that people understand, as has been reflected today, how we're investing in our infrastructure, and that there's greater transparency around that. So it touches on a number of the issues that have been raised.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to follow on the point that was made by Liz Denison there about the cost multipliers. And in the world of business and commerce, it's very much used, and it's known as wooden dollars, because every department has to stand on its own 2 feet and show a profit. The benefits you see in bigger organisations, when I worked with McRae and Dick, they created a new separate branch called Branch 21, and that was where they wholesaled every item that they bought in bulk. They then wholesaled it, whether it was toilet rolls, anything, consumables, soaps, stuff like that, when they were selling it out to filling stations, selling it to garages, or cars themselves when they were buying them in bulk, and then they were selling them off one by one to each location. And the end result was that the profit that came from that Branch 21 was the equivalent of another standing bricks and mortar branch on the street, because it retained money. And what you realise is that it's the benefit of buying in bulk. There were times, though, that we had to park that idea and say, right, OK, we're going to be competitive here, because if we sell a tow bar for a car and fit it, then we're charging the public £600. Our competitors are charging £400. So we need to realise that we need to be as competitive as them, and therefore everybody takes a little bit of a chip off the price, and we can then sell it as a special offer. But in order to sell it at that reduced price, we needed to make sure we're going to sell extra multiples of it to compensate for the reduction in the margin. But it's a recognised way. It happens in Arnold Clark organisation. When they do a scoop purchase, they'll buy 100 vehicles and then sell them to each of the branches. They retain the money, a percentage on it, on what they've benefited by their bulk purchase. So it's a good way of doing it, and it shows the expertise of a department, be it IT or HR or others. So I'm all for it, and I think it means that you're paying a real world price, because if you weren't attached to the council and you weren't able to buy as many toilet rolls or utilities, items, then you would have to pay a higher premium for it than if you were buying them in blocks of 10 rather than buying them in hundreds or 200s. So just a thought on that, but certainly a good idea, and it's a good way to retain money into the organisation. Thank you.
I think the difference is that in this circumstance, the only customer is the council, and therefore we are charging ourselves at inflated prices. And that may mean that we actually use external services when really we should be using internal services. So it's a slightly different situation, Duncan, but I appreciate what you say. Laurie Fraser.
Yeah, I picked up a couple of wee bitties on there, the charge out, but I have seen the situation with these charge outs. People actually go to outside organisations because it's cheaper than buying from the internal organisation. Although in the council case, it doesn't happen. The other thing was on building control. I've been trying to get a building warrant for the last 8 years for a job, and I've just given up because of the system. So I don't think it's that great. I think there's people who lose out once you go off the paper base into the electronic. It gets a wee bit frustrating. I mean, you always ask for people's phone numbers and email addresses on the paperwork, but you never seem to come back to them. That's a wee point for Duncan and his building control. Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Okay, members, from a personal point of view, I think this is an example of why the redesign board works. The collaboration between staff, senior management, members, unions, right across the board is why the redesign board does what it does. And it's why that so many good ideas end up coming forward to fruition. But as I said a few minutes ago, we need to make sure that this is delivered. Members, there are a host of recommendations, 10 of them. Can we agree them en masse, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the Immunities project and Carolyn Campbell. I think.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Thank you for having us along today. We've got quite a comprehensive report in front of you this morning, so I'm not going to talk for too long other than just carry out a very brief introduction. So the paper updates you about the progress that we've made to date, and it describes the resetting of the Immunities review as a project, and it follows on from the presentation that we made to you on the 27th of November last year. And it includes any learning that we have from COVID. And of course, we're learning every day about doing something different as a result of where we are. We set out the project under 6 project objectives. And within the report, we've updated progress made within each of the objectives. So the objectives very quickly are, objective 1 is looking at delivering services in-house, and we've made quite a bit of progress on that, which is good news. Objective 2 is about insourcing and commercial opportunities. Option 3 is about partnership working. Objective 4 is working more closely in alignment with a Highland High Life. Objective 5 is looking at community involvement, and I think that's something that we have learned quite a lot from as a result of last year. And in particular, I know Councillor Bremner is quite passionate about this, and we had some really good feedback from the work up in Caithness. And option 6 is round about biodiversity. Within the report, we talk about the timescales, and that is outlined at Appendix 1. The project is timelined to April 2023, and progress has been made and captured in Appendix 1 for you. So some things are happening right now. The insourcing is well underway, as is the review of services delivered in-house. The work streams with longer completion times include commercial activities and community food growing. They're a lot more complex, obviously, to deal with. And the last objective is COVID, and that's just really an ongoing factor that I think most of us are still dealing with, and that will possibly impact on some of the project progress, although we'll try not to let that happen. And any slippage will be agreed, and timescales will be updated, and you as board will obviously be kept abreast of anything like that. Just as we heard about from Malcolm and Stuart and Scott just now, one of the most important things in any project is keeping the staff involved. And I think when we look back at what we presented in November, one of the nicest slides for me certainly was the one where we had the staff with a high-vis jacket and post-it notes working around the room and contributing to what went well, what didn't go so well, what we could do differently, what did our communities want from our operatives' perspective. And you know, they're the people who know what's happening, they know what's important within their communities. I think we really look forward to the day that we can get back out and engage with staff in that manner. But in the meantime, we'll use other mechanisms to keep staff involved. So that's just a quick update of where we are, what we're doing. We've got a lot of information there from you. Kathleen Urquhart, a project manager, is with us today. So between Kathleen and myself, happy to take any questions, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions waiting for us. So thanks very much, Chair, for that.
Councillor Bremner.
Thanks very much, convener, and thanks, Caroline, for the report. Yes, I've been. This has very much been on my radar for a long time. I've been very much involved in it, and the work that's been going on up here in Caithness, and we're just about to see that season open up again. And here's to all the work that everybody undertakes. Great, good report. You'll not be surprised with some of the points that I'm going to make on this. Just kind of as an overview of the whole report and observations. The first thing is obviously where we're looking to do something, redesign it and make it, more beneficial and better for our communities and our employees, and the expectation of the public. That's one of the big ones in amenities, is making sure that we rise to the expectation, but we manage it. That's the main thing that we've got to do. When it comes to amenities, they are the high visual impact is always recognised in a positive manner when it's done well, but by heck, it's seen to be a failure if it's not done well. And that's one of the things that we're all looking to see come out of this review. How we manage that forward cleverly in all the different ways that are going to come out of this review. How we manage it forward cleverly. The second thing is going to be in terms of the communication with all the parties involved. Where we, I agreed with you. I was at that review the day that. Sorry, you weren't there, but I know that I know all the people who were there. The room was full of them, and it was the afternoon session that kicked off. And you know that it took a sledgehammer to crack the nut to get the employees to open up because all they saw there was just a bunch of suits. And that solidified for me the fact that, you know, that's still entrenched within council in many areas, where managers and those who are the decision makers are fairly adrift from those that are at the coalface delivering the service. But once we managed to get the communication going, yeah, that's when the post-it started going up and the ideas started coming forward. That needs to be a more comfortable position. That needs to be a more comfortable situation. It needs to be more fluid, where employees are engaged and feel as though it's that you know, they're champing at the bit to give their ideas. That is not just a cultural change that we need within the amenities, but in several areas in council. So that'll come out of this review. One of the points that may inhibit across council is when redesign is seen to be something that's negative, and that is, if you're reminded to bring forward a salami slicing exercise or a cost cutting exercise, and I don't apologise for my language there, where if we are considering that we need to make savings and therefore we bring along redesign, and redesign makes the savings, and all of a sudden we're not going to be employing seasonal workers, that's the wrong impression to give to anybody. That's not what redesign is about. Redesign is about complementing. It's about it's making something better, more efficient, and employees as well as the community should realise that as a benefit. We don't want employees to think that the goal of redesign is to replace their jobs with volunteers, and I'm saying that on the record. It never will, and I will not be vice chair of a redesign board that allows that to be seen by the communities. We've got to get that message right. So, and I'm sure we can get that message right in the amenities review here. And I'll just chop to my notes to see if I've covered everything. Yeah, so employee displacement communication, really important, employee expectations of the outcome. Yeah, where the employees are coming forward with their ideas, they will have expectations as well in how that their lot may be improved, so that they don't have such a difficult job to undertake going forward. I'm very much on the employee side on this in this review, and I'm sure many of us will be. The outcome of what they do is seen very visually in the public light, and we need to bear that on in mind as we continue with this review. Thanks, Bill, for bringing me in.
Thanks, Raymond. Members, any other points you want to raise? Okay. Can we agree the 4 recommendations then, please?
Agreed.
Thank you. You got off easily today, Caroline. I'm sure it'll be different next time.
Oh, I am under no doubt. And thank you, Councillor Bremner, for all the points that you have raised. And I think it's absolutely imperative, and we discussed it very briefly yesterday, this is not about cutting the workforce. This is about a better place-based approach to the amenity service. And hopefully members, hopefully staff will see the value that members and communities place on the amenities role. That the saving we put forward to reduce the amenities workforce wasn't accepted. And I think that sends our staff a really strong message about their role and what they deliver. And it's really about boosting that with those teams. And absolutely, totally on board with all of that, Councillor Bremner. Thanks very much for your points.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you.
Item 6, members, is workforce planning and development, the progress update. And the progress update really is that we're kind of getting to the end of the progress. So I'll ask Liz to give us a few brief words.
Certainly, and they will be brief. This report really is just an update from the last meeting, where we were asked to provide a RAG status and some actual dates on the action plan, and that's included there within the appendix. And you can see there is obviously considerable green, but I'm sure it's the reds that you will be more interested in, and a lot of that relates to the workforce data. Considerable resources being spent just looking at the data within the current system and trying to improve that. And I think where we've got to is that the current system is not allowing us to do what we need to do, and therefore our priority is to move on very quickly to review and look at a new HR payroll system. But the information's there within the appendix for the actions.
Any questions, members? Yes, Carla.
Thanks, Convener. Sorry, I'm working off two screens and it seems to be a bit slow to go to the unmute button. No, I think this is a really important piece of work. We've said it before. I'm not going to repeat things I said the last time. This is probably the most critical piece of work the council has to do, because this is going to be an enabler for lots of other departments across the whole council. It's not just about managing our costs, it's about managing Oki Health more effectively, it's about managing absence, holidays, cross-working, sharing people with qualifications, knowing what people are, it's the whole piece. And I think we've known for at least the last 4 or 5 years that our HR system is not fit for purpose. And it's not ever got to the top of the pile of things, of list of things to do. And I think this piece of work that the redesign have done on it has been quite thorough. And I'm very grateful that we are now at a point where, speaking as a long-term HR professional, this is really critical to the business of the council. This is not an HR issue. This is a management business issue. And I think that cleansing the data, absolutely, you need to do that before you put it into a system. But the procurement of an HR system, as you know, is not an easy or quick fix or a quick thing to do, even achieve. So I would quite like to see timelines about when this is going to happen, what target dates, that we really expect it to be procured, transition, up and running properly in the future, because otherwise it's a bit like the engineering project. There's so much pre-work been done. We're a bit further ahead with this one, but if we don't see it through to its end, this work will all have been wasted. I mean, it's always good having clean data, but the system is not fit for purpose at the moment. And it's not just a payroll system, it's a complete management system, so that managers can have real-time information about their staff rather than having to go back to spreadsheets, inputting data 3 or 4 times, that sort of thing. And we all know that. It's just, it's my natural impatience. So I apologise, but I'd like to see this done sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Liz, this is maybe something that, whilst we're getting to the end of our part of the project, is something that you can maybe report to us on how specifically the reds and ambers are progressing in a few months' time.
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Convener. You've just been reading my notes. I think thank you for the notes, but I think it's really important that we know where the reds and ambers are. And the Convener and I are not sharing any data here, I can assure you. And also, what have the group learned that may expedite things or may negate things from practices during COVID? Because that must be an influencer on how we're doing things. And just to reiterate what Councillor Caddick has said, I think this is really important. It's important for everybody, because the organisation cannot work effectively unless this is right, the whole thing with the systems and HR in place. Thank you.
Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Liz and team, for the report. It's, again, another exciting move forward. I've got a couple of questions about the sort of format of the report, which seem a bit nitpicking, but this way we've got from page 39 onwards in Appendix 2, where we've got what is basically a landscape page being presented in what would you say, pictorial form. I've got a feeling if we could realign these pages so that they were actually printed on landscape, it makes them bigger, it doesn't use up more paper, and it makes it easier to read. That's just a bit of nitpicking about this. But I mean, some more substantive things that I would like to inject. we need to. Where is Appendix 2? First of all, it says, you know, on page 39, it refers to Appendix 2, which provided areas needs. It says see Appendix 2. That seems to be missing on my copy of the report. Maybe something to do with the way I've printed it out. I think we don't want to shoot past the requirements analysis stage. I know you've referred to it here, but it's not just a matter of tidying up what we've got. We need to look at what we actually need, stepping back, and the current data is not going to tell us that. What we need to do is to look at what is needed to support what we want to do with the system. Now, again, this relates to something I said about the engineering side again. We need the requirements analysis and we need HR systems design. The data analysis and structuring is an engineering process that we will need to do within this project, but also the processes that create the outputs from that data, they need to be designed as well. And I just think maybe we want to put a wee bit more emphasis on that in these outputs, description of the outputs here. On page 41, there's a heading, performance, and it's about how we retain and reward knowledge and experience. And I think it's not just a matter about retaining and so on. We need to review proactively performance appraisal at an individual and a section and departmental level, at all service levels. So in here, what we'll be doing, the outputs that we want are, what are the training needs? What are the development needs? And what's the gap between what we have just now and where we need to be? Coming from that, we have the recruitment requirements. We also importantly get the individual aspirations. Again, that's mentioned in the report, but I just think it needs mentioned in this heading, performance. The individual aspirations tell us about maybe what resource we've got that we're not using as much as we could. And we need to know what the qualifications and the experience are. So I know that performance appraisal in some organisations had very bad press, but I think we've got to look at it as a very positive aspect of the HR systems. It's not a matter of criticising what has been done or not done. It's a matter of actively identifying what training needs are, what recruitment requirements are, and meeting individual aspirations of staff. I'd just like to emphasise, I think this is a great report. It's marvellous. It's just a matter of emphasis. But on this one, I think we don't want the software people to tell us what we need. We need to do the requirements analysis for ourselves and then go out there and tell them what we want them to deliver. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to actually go into the details of the report. I've been involved in this since its inception, and the report speaks for itself, Camilla. But one of the things that I'm going to ask for the team that's involved with workforce planning is to take a note, for me, more than anybody else. But you know, when we've been getting them involved, the staff have been involved, and when we put out the survey and then the responses came back, Carl, and I just want to make sure that when we get to the end of this project and the implementation of it, that we actually go back and make sure it goes back down to the communication again, that we get back to the people that were involved to get an idea of how we met their aspirations, and where what they said, we listened, and here's what we did. Because I've mentioned that in each of the reviews that's been before us today, where we have involved in the staff, where we have involved staff and employees, that has been our opportunity to engage with them. They've realised that if they don't see that, and I've heard this in council before, and I do not mean it to be negative today, but it is a learning process that we're going through, where they let us know what's the point in getting involved in a survey. Remember when we heard that, we got actually a really good response to that survey. But when they don't get that information back, where they don't know what they actively got involved in and how they made a positive contribution, it puts them off getting involved in things like that again. So that's a point for us in this one, but also a point for others and other reviews that are undertaken at redesign level for us to get back to the staff and let them know exactly what it was that they contributed to in terms of a positive outcome. Convener, just before we wrap up today, if I could get an opportunity to comment on the overview of redesign.
By all means.
Shall I take that just now?
I'll let Liz finish, and then we can speak about it afterwards.
Sure,
Liz.
thanks.
Thanks everyone, and really good comments. In terms of the Appendix 2, it's a typing error, so apologies for that. There is no Appendix 2. And also the timeline for the new system. We think that it will be at least 2 years before we have a new system in place. That's the likely timeline. That's what we're thinking about. So any interim measures that we put in place for workforce data, it's going to have to stand the test of time, unfortunately, for 2 years. But it will be worth it if we can move on now with a new HR payroll system. And as part of the budget process, there was a small sum of money set aside to have a very small team that can actually take forward the preparatory work for a new HR payroll system. So I'm really grateful for that. I think the important thing as well to emphasise is that this project is about the workforce strategy and the workforce planning. There's another project that actually deals with the workforce data. So a lot of the things that Councillor Boyd mentioned was dealt with through the workforce data. They're absolutely linked, because obviously any new system, we want to make sure that all that data is readily available. So we'll certainly make sure that we take that on board. And I think the other comment about the what did the staff think, did we meet their aspirations? I think that's something that we could ask just now, because what we need to do, one of the lessons learned is to launch the workforce planning strategy, because I think the last time it's like we've had it, it's there, it's actually not really needed very much change to it, but we need to launch it. So I think whether that's at next resources committee, we do that launch, but in advance of the launch, we link back in with staff to find out what they think. And that could be part of the update to resources committee, just to say what went well, what didn't. So we can certainly do that, but happy to keep everyone as involved and up to date as possible with progress.
I have a sneaking suspicion that Councillor Carrick wishes to mention the 2-year lead time. So, Carolyn.
Well, it was really a question. 2 years to have it implemented and up and running doesn't sound unreasonable, because I understand entirely the specification, the contracting, the transfer. But if we're planning it to be up and running in 2 years, that sounds not unreasonable. But that's the end date is probably what I'm going to ask, is that we think it will be up and running and fully working in 2 years.
Liz?
At the moment, that's certainly our intention. Now, we haven't started, we don't have a group together yet for the new HR payroll system, but based on the information that we've got at this stage, it would be up and running and implemented in 2 years. But that will be subject to getting a new HR payroll system, determining what it is and moving at a pace. But it's our intention. We do not want to remain with the system that we have for a moment longer.
Yeah, I think that's
absolutely necessary.
From my perspective, and I'm sure some other members here just want to know that procurement is going to start, because it does take time, and we're all aware of that. But yeah, saying it's going to be up and running, but there's that lead time. I think we all heard that in public, so we will be holding you to it. Thank you.
Raymond?
Yes, I'll come in on the point that we just made there just now, but Caroline's talked about it. So, and it's something we can bring up at the discussion of the next catch for the workforce planning team. That's what I put in the chat there. So, yep, that's fine. The 2 years. That's a better clarity than it is just putting the 2 years out there and everybody going, what, So thanks for the clarification. We can keep that on board at the workforce planning team update.
You're asked to note the progress on item 6, and I think we've done that quite well. And Liz has promised to bring some things back to us when required. I think we also need to look forward as we come to the end of the meeting. So what next? Because our involvement in workforce planning is coming to an end. But really, I think the next logical thing for us to do is asset rationalisation and new ways of working. I think the redesign board should be heavily involved in that, and I would ask members to volunteer. Send me an email if you wish to become involved in the project, because I think it's the next really important thing that we need to do. And before I finish, there's been several mentions of paper. Just don't wind me up anymore. I intend you would guess to mention paper at the council meeting on Thursday. So, Raymond.
My apologies for winding you up. But just a light-hearted note on the fact that yesterday when we were having our redesign pre-discussion, the postman had to open my door and throw the papers in, and they nearly broke the floor for council this Thursday. Apart from the fact that, yeah, there you go. The fact is that those papers have all been read. Most of us have discussed them in the way that we need to discuss them and bring them to our thoughts to the table on Thursday. So I won't be reading them, and that's a travesty that all that work was put into printing all that stuff. Half of the load was minutes. Yeah, half of it was minutes. Deary me. So yeah, my apologies, but not apologising for winding the convener up this morning. On another, back to redesign. Yeah, for me, there are two projects that we're looking at just now that are presented in the papers today. You can't get away from the fact that, I mean, I've really enjoyed redesign, still enjoy redesign. I think it's an essential part of the council's function going forward. The two things are the engineering. I think that in the engineering, there's all the mention of roads. Margaret, you mentioned it earlier on about roads. I think that is definitely one of the automatic branches that we now take forward from that. We have got a roads infrastructure that needs a desperate strategy in terms of going forward and how we do that. I would advocate that then is the continuance of the engineering review. We then focus into our roads strategy going forward at redesign. It will be a big one, I know, but we can do it. We've got plenty of skill within the council to be able to make our approach to roads a much better one, and maybe a local authority leading one. So let's be up for that challenge. The second one, as the convener said there just now, is it's an aspiration of many of us in terms of the estate rationalisation. And again, that needs to be opened up to get the skills of everybody within council to the table. And the last bit I would say is it's just a wee bit disappointing the amount of members that are in attendance today. I've seen that, and the amount of members that there are actually on the redesign board. Now, I'm not actually being particularly critical per se, but as I was mentioning yesterday, I remember when we were at redesign, this is one thing where being virtual has not been kind to the redesign process. You know, when you get in about rooms and you've got the stickers up and you've got the whole, you've got the integration of members and staff, and you know we saw it in the Immunities project that we've been doing, and in projects that we've been doing before that, Bill, where we've all been together. Is you just get that collaborative feeling about it that you miss on the virtual means. And maybe it's time to, you know, as soon as we can get past this virtual technology by necessity, then by design we're back into that integrated and that's officers as well. We saw officers that were coming along that were interested but not necessarily deeply involved. crikey, we were 3 rows deep at times in those committee rooms in Chambers and Inverness. So it's just an encouragement for members to get back on board, to get practically involved, integrated, and the last point is the convener was saying there just now. Let's see which members that we've got that really can take up the mantle of some of the challenges that we've got within redesign, whether it's to do with estate rationalisation, whether it's to do with roads and engineering, and they've got a construction background, all that kind of stuff. Make the most of the talent we've got, whether it's officers or members across the board, and re-enthuse the redesign board team. Thanks.
Yeah, and one of the big things is that you actually get to meet members of staff that you would never have met. You put a face to them and you can listen to them, and you actually hear how good they actually are at their job. So members, I'm going to call it to an end with that, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next workshop. Matt, you can maybe try and get a workshop in the diary. I noticed there's been a question as to whether papers are circulated to all members, and to be quite honest, I'll need to check and find out. I don't know, but I'm sure Morgan does.
Not paper papers, just electronic.
No, I understand what you're talking about. Liz, you get your hand up.
Yeah, nothing to do with redesign, but just a reminder, there's a minute of reflection at 12 o'clock.